Picture a packed Las Vegas showroom. Lights warm, music floating, thousands of people leaning forward without even realizing it. On stage is Dean Martin, relaxed, smiling, completely in control, the kind of performer who makes a crowded room feel like a living room. He steps closer to the edge, greeting the audience the way he always did, turning strangers into friends with a touch and a grin. Then, in a moment so small almost no one notices, something precious disappears. A hand lingers too long, a ring slides free, a boundary is crossed. Dean feels it instantly, not confusion, not panic, just a quiet knowing that something important has been taken from him in front of everyone. Yet the music keeps going. His face doesn't change. The show doesn't stop. And that restraint is what should make you pause. Because most people, given power, money, and a spotlight, would react. They would call it out. They would protect their pride. Instead, Dean chooses stillness. And there, in that silence, a question is planted. When you are wronged publicly, do you reach for justice or do you reach for something harder? The answer to that question is where this story begins. To understand why this moment mattered, you have to slow down and sit inside the room the way it was then. Las Vegas in the late 60s wasn't just noise and neon, it was ritual. People dressed up, not to be seen, but to belong to something larger than themselves. The showroom hummed with anticipation, a soft collective breath held by thousands who trusted they were about to be taken somewhere better for a little while. Dean Martin understood that trust. On stage, he never rushed, never begged for attention. He leaned into silence as comfortably as he leaned into melody. Between songs, he wandered toward the crowd, not as a star demanding applause, but as a man enjoying company. He shook hands, traded smiles, let people feel chosen. That wasn't an act. It was how he disarmed a room without raising his voice. What made him powerful wasn't volume or ego, it was ease. He had nothing to prove, and the audience could feel it. When someone like that looks you in the eye, you lower your guard. You assume safety. You assume decency. That unspoken agreement is what turned a massive venue into something intimate, almost fragile. This is where the story tightens, because trust, once established, raises the stakes of everything that follows. When a crowd believes a performer is present with them, not above them, every gesture carries weight, every small moment matters. That night, Dean wasn't performing at people, he was sharing space with them. And that's why what happened next wasn't just theft, it was a violation of something invisible but sacred, a bond built slowly, quietly, through years of consistency and grace. You can't understand the gravity of the moment unless you understand the calm that came before it, the kindness, the familiarity, the sense that everyone in that room was safe to lean forward, to reach out, to trust. Ask yourself something honestly. When you've earned that kind of trust, when people feel seen around you, how do you carry that responsibility? Do you protect it only when it's convenient, or do you honor it even when it costs you? Dean had been answering that question long before anyone noticed, and that night, without knowing it, the room was about to see his answer. It's easy to admire grace from a distance, harder to practice it up close, especially when pride is bruised. Yet moments like this reveal who we are before we explain ourselves. Long before consequences arrive, character already speaks. That quiet consistency is what people feel, even if they can't name it. And once you sense it, you watch more closely, you listen differently, you wait. Because when calm people are tested, their response teaches more than any speech ever could. And in that waiting, something meaningful forms, a shared understanding that some reactions shape rooms, memories, even lives, long after applause fades and lights dim, leaving people quietly changed without ever asking for recognition or permission to matter.
It happened in less time than it takes to form a thought. One moment, Dean was leaning forward, hand extended, exchanging warmth with the people closest to him. The next, a grip lingered just a fraction too long. Not dramatic, not forceful, just wrong. In that brief contact, something slipped away, light as breath, unnoticed by everyone except the man it belonged to. He felt the absence before he saw it, the quiet shock of something familiar no longer being where it had always been. If you've ever lost something meaningful, you know that sensation. Not panic, not anger, but a hollow pause where your body registers loss before your mind can name it. Dean glanced down. Just once, the ring was gone. No announcement, no break in rhythm. The music continued, the crowd remained unaware, and the show moved forward as if nothing had changed. That contrast is where the tension lives. Inside him, something had been taken. Outside, everything looked exactly the same. This is where most people would react. Pride would flare. Instinct would demand correction. After all, it happened in public, in front of witnesses, under lights that magnify every slight. But Dean did nothing. He smiled. He turned back toward the microphone. He chose composure over confrontation. And that choice matters because it creates questions that hang in the air unanswered. Was the theft noticed by anyone else? Would it be addressed later? Did the object matter enough to stop the show? What makes this moment powerful isn't the act itself, but the restraint surrounding it. The decision to carry on asks something of the viewer. It invites you to step into that instant and ask yourself what you would have done. Would you protect your dignity or your sense of justice? Would you expose the wrong or absorb it quietly and deal with it later? There's no resolution yet, only tension stretched thin by patience. Loss has a way of sharpening awareness. As Dean finished the performance, every note landed, every pause held, but underneath it all was the weight of something missing. The crowd applauded, unaware they were witnessing not just professionalism, but discipline. And in that silence between applause and consequence, the story deepened. Because when someone chooses calm in the face of violation, they aren't avoiding the moment, they're postponing it. And postponement, when intentional, often leads to consequences far greater than impulse ever could. The curtain dropped and the applause faded, leaving a quiet tension that stretched into the backstage hallway. Dean didn't rush or gesture. He simply walked to a place where the world's eyes couldn't follow, where the stakes felt closer, sharper. The thief, a man no one had noticed beyond a fleeting grasp, now became a figure under the full weight of scrutiny. What does it feel like to stand in that sudden exposure, knowing the consequences are yours to face, yet the person you wronged remains calm, measured, almost indifferent? That is the question suspended in the air, the tension that demands attention without a word. Dean's authority did not roar. It was a stillness that carried more weight than anger ever could. He did not shout. He did not berate. He simply looked, and that look rearranged the room. The man's trembling hands, the slump of his shoulders, the way his gaze dropped to the floor, all revealed what desperation feels like when it collides with grace. There is a difference between fear of punishment and recognition of consequence, and that difference is what this moment teaches. It is subtle, almost invisible, but profoundly disarming. The imbalance of power had reversed. The thief, who had acted boldly in public, now felt the quiet gravity of being truly seen. The dialogue that followed was measured, deliberate, each question layered with curiosity and expectation, yet void of hostility. Dean asked simply, without accusation, inviting honesty instead of defensiveness. "What is your name? What drove this action?" Even in his restraint, there is an implied command: reflect, reveal, reconcile. The man answers in fragments, voice cracking, admitting not cleverness, but fear, not intent, but desperation. And in that admission, the audience of one becomes humanized, stripped of villainy, framed by circumstance rather than character. The pacing here is critical. Silence holds as much as speech, letting the weight of each confession settle, letting the tension breathe. The shift from public spectacle to intimate confrontation magnifies the stakes, forcing the viewer to recognize that actions in the open world carry deeper consequences behind the scenes. Every pause, every inhalation becomes a teacher of restraint, a study in authority expressed without aggression. Empathy and power coexist, creating a contrast that lingers. A man capable of being wronged, yet chooses to observe, to understand before reacting. The lesson is quiet but resonant. It is in the patience, the measured response, the ability to hold composure while life's small crises test the boundaries of character.
Dean transforms what could have been humiliation into an opportunity for reflection, for redemption. And as the first cracks of fear begin to give way to comprehension, the room, the moment, and the lesson shift together, leaving the viewer to ask quietly, how do we treat those who falter when we hold the power to condemn? The moment the ring left his hand, it was no longer just a piece of jewelry. It was a vessel of memory, a fragile shard of a lifelong past, carrying weight far beyond its material value. How often do we underestimate the power of objects to hold meaning, to anchor us to people and moments we cannot recover? For Dean, this ring was the final connection to a love lost decades before, a promise made in youth, a life interrupted by events too large to control. Every day he wore it, it reminded him of what had been beautiful and irreplaceable, a quiet testament to love, devotion, and memory. And now it was gone, vanished in a hand too quick, too careless, yet motivated by desperation rather than malice. Do we recognize how fragile the symbols of our own lives are? How they carry not just sentiment, but the essence of experience, waiting for someone else to understand their weight? The theft unbearable is not the loss of material, but the severing of a tether to the past, to a story that had shaped him and would continue to shape him until his last day. The ring had witnessed love, heartbreak, and the lingering echo of promises that were never fulfilled. It was the vessel of grief and hope combined, a private relic, yet one that silently testified to resilience. And when it was taken, Dean did not shout, he did not scold. He simply held the absence in his hands, letting it speak to him in silence, allowing the gravity of memory and loss to unfold without interference. That pause, that reflection, asks the viewer, how often do we carry treasures we dare not expose, and what happens when the world suddenly lays claim to them? There is a delicate intimacy in grief and memory, and objects can become our conduits. The stolen ring, in this sense, was a mirror of vulnerability, showing that even someone as composed and admired as Dean Martin carried wounds and attachments invisible to the public eye. Can we see beyond the surface of calm, recognize the stories embedded in silence, and honor the weight they bear? It is in that understanding that empathy forms, and in empathy, the theft transforms from a mere act of loss into a moment of shared human fragility. The audience, though unaware, is invited to witness the sacredness of what was taken, the invisible threads connecting past and present, love and memory, and the quiet ways in which our most private grief can illuminate the human experience when handled with grace, reflection, and depth. Dean Martin could have chosen anger. He could have summoned the full weight of the law, called attention to the theft, demanded justice in a way that would have been easy, unquestionable, and expected. But most people, when wronged in public, reach for retribution first and reflection second. But Dean paused, measured, allowing himself a moment to assess not the crime, but the person who had committed it. What drives someone to cross a line when the world is already unkind? Who are we when confronted with the desperate choices of another human being? That question became his compass, and it guided a decision that would define the moment and, in truth, reveal the depths of his own character.
When the man trembled, offering excuses and apologies that barely reached his own ears, Dean listened. He saw beyond the act to the circumstance, to the quiet desperation that had compelled it. And then, without grand gesture or spectacle, he acted with generosity that surprised even those who knew him best. A gift, unanticipated, practical, transformative, not to erase wrongdoing, but to elevate the human condition above the transgression. It was a decision rooted in values that required no explanation. Empathy over anger, hope over punishment, the well-being of a child over personal grievance.
This is where grace becomes radical. We often measure morality in terms of right and wrong, reward and punishment, yet Dean demonstrated that true strength is expressed in restraint, in measured action, in the courage to turn an act of violation into a moment of redemption. It is a rare thing to witness someone choose compassion over consequence, to prioritize the unseen lives affected rather than their own momentary satisfaction, and in doing so, he transformed the story itself, reshaping fear into relief, despair into opportunity, and shame into lesson. Ask yourself honestly, what would you do in that same situation? Would you demand repayment, assert authority, protect pride? Or would you see the humanity beneath the act, the story behind the desperation, and act in a way that transcends instinct? Dean Martin's choice teaches that sometimes the highest form of power is not control, but understanding. That by elevating mercy above judgment, he didn't just change a life, he altered the meaning of the entire moment. And as we reflect on it, there is an almost tangible release, a moral exhalation, because the world can be cruel, yet even in that cruelty, extraordinary grace is possible. In that choice, the stakes shifted. A stolen ring became more than metal and inscription. It became a conduit for transformation, a vehicle for hope, a reminder that our decisions in moments of confrontation define not only who we are, but who we can inspire others to be. Dean Martin's response, calm, intentional, and humane, resonates because it offers a blueprint for navigating our own moral crossroads. It reminds us that compassion can be a force stronger than punishment, that patience can wield greater authority than anger, and that when we choose understanding over retribution, we create moments that echo far beyond the immediate, teaching the world that grace is not weakness, but a power both profound and enduring. What Dean Martin did that night did not end when the lights dimmed or when the crowd left the showroom. Its ripple extended far beyond the immediate moment, transforming not only the life of the man who took the ring, but also the subtle way those who witnessed or heard the story understood the possibilities of human response. When someone chooses grace over judgment, it creates a quiet legacy, one that is felt rather than broadcasted, measured not in headlines, but in the small, lasting changes that flow outward from a single act. How often do we recognize that the choices we make in brief, intense moments can echo for years, shaping not just our own character, but the lives of others we may never meet? The aftermath of that night illustrates this principle vividly. The man who had stolen the ring was given not punishment, but a path to redemption, a chance to right what had been wrong in a way that restored hope rather than instilled fear. His daughter's life was saved, but the transformation went deeper than the immediate relief. He was shown a standard of integrity and generosity that would guide his own choices moving forward. One act of measured compassion created a chain reaction, proving that kindness, when exercised with intention, has the power to reconstruct lives and redefine personal ethics. And Dean, in returning the ring to its place on his finger, reaffirmed the symbolic power of memory and love. That simple gesture, repeated countless times over the years, became a living reminder that what we value most is not the object itself, but the principles and stories it represents. Legacy is rarely about recognition. It is about the enduring lessons embedded in our actions. In this story, the ring represents far more than gold or inscription. It embodies memory, love, loss, and the way we respond when confronted with human frailty. Dean's choice communicated that mercy can outweigh justice, that understanding can surpass punishment, and that we are defined more by how we lift others in moments of crisis than by how we protect our own interests. Every time someone reflects on this story, shares it, or internalizes its lesson, the impact of that night multiplies. We are reminded that our decisions carry weight, that our reactions ripple outward, and that one act of courage, patience, and empathy can leave an indelible mark far beyond what is immediately visible.